Hey everyone, Eric Watson here, freelance writer, player of games, writer of words, recorder of videos, survivor of the zombie apocalypse. Welcome to my thoughts on The Walking Dead. With this video, I'll be covering Season 9, Episode 5, What Comes After. Holy crap, this was a hell of an episode. This was the much highly anticipated Rick's final episode. Question mark? Asterisk? Big spoiler. It's obviously I'll be recapping and reviewing this episode. Um, Last week's was, I thought, the weakest episode of the season, and this is probably the best episode of the season. That's my knee-jerk reaction. This one did a lot of things similar to what Tyrese's episode did when he died, in that it introduced a lot of past characters who had died as kind of an emotional way of like, oh, it's okay to give up and it's time to die now and all that. And this one kind of did that, but way better and with a different theme. Instead of this time, it was like, no, don't let go, don't let go. You need to wake up. But the way it used those characters and used those scenes was more meaningful, and the whole episode worked a lot better. First, I want to start by jumping into the one kind of side story. It wasn't all Rick. It was almost all Rick, but we actually did get the culmination of Maggie's vengeance, which ended up being a pretty simple, poignant sequence that I think worked pretty well, considering they kind of teased this as being like a big, maybe possibly overarching plot point, or at least an important one in the show, and really it just kind of all got resolved as a very minor side sequence in this episode, but I think it was pretty effective. Switch over here. By the way, Maggie, Lauren Cohen, looking really good with the hair longer out. I really like her look in this episode, in this season in general. She gets to Alexandria, and Michonne is there, kind of waiting for her as the one person like standing in line, or standing in her way. And the two of them have a really good scene together, where Michonne basically says like, "Look, I know you're hurt. I don't know what to say to you. This is a really tough situation for you." Obviously, I'm paraphrasing quite a bit, but both of them essentially, they don't have this like knockdown, drag out fight that you'd think like a Rick and Daryl would. Even though they're both very much can be very aggressive fighters, when it comes to how they deal with their problems. Both of them are no strangers to killing people, for example. But I think it's a really good scene where Michonne basically just lets her go in there. She's like, okay, I know this is rough for you, and I'm just going to let this happen, and whatever happens, happens. Which I was kind of expecting Michonne would throw up more of a wall, but instead she really does empathize with Michonne's situation, lets her in. And Maggie, well, first, Negan plays like Negan's all about playing people, and Negan plays Maggie pretty well initially. He gets her because his goal is, as we find out, is to have Maggie kill him. He does not want to live. He is, I guess not suicidal, because he literally can't. He says he can't kill himself, but he has a death wish. He does not want to be imprisoned. He wants to die. And so for that to work, he eggs on Maggie and basically says like, "Oh, how much I enjoyed killing Glenn," and he gets all graphic about what had happened and everything else. And of course, this greatly upsets Maggie, who's was already very angry, and now she's kind of bubbling over. But Maggie still senses something is off here, and she kept saying, "Come into the light, come into the light." And she finally lets him out. And we're never in any danger here. It's not shot at all to where we think Negan is a threat, which I think is important. It's all very much from Maggie's point of view. Maggie is in complete control of this situation. And when he comes out, he is a crying, blubbering mess. He is a shell of a man. He is not sad about what he did. He's just upset about being in this completely impotent position of, he's no longer a leader. He's no longer really anything. He's just in prison for life. And he's been that way for a year and a half. And Maggie finally tells us what that kind of time jump it is. Maybe they told us at some point, and I just didn't quite like write it down or realize it, but it's been a year and a half since he's been in prison. Now, there was a sequence earlier in this season where Rick specifically talked to Negan, and Negan even said, "You're just getting it ready for me to come back." And it seemed like Negan was still all full of, piss and vinegar and spite. But now in the last like 2 episodes or so, and especially when he talked to Michonne, as we discovered, that's not the case at all. So there might have been like a time jump there, for sure, because I think they were building a bridge, but it just seemed like he was like recently broken. And really just a shell. And so Maggie sees this and says, the effective line's like, "Hey, I came to kill Negan, but Negan's already dead. Like, you were just a nobody. You're a nothing." And she knows that killing him would actually be in his best interest, because like living as this is, and he already said he can't kill himself, so he's just kind of screwed over, is really the worst torture. So that's the closure for her. She finally gets to see him and see that he has been just completely destroyed emotionally and psychologically from being imprisoned like this, and that works pretty well for her. So it's a nice sequence. I think it's a good payoff for Maggie, and it works pretty well without also taking up a whole lot of screen time. And Jeffrey Dean Morgan does a great job acting this shit out of the scene. Really, really effective, even though this is not totally at all like the main sequence of this episode. Instead, the main sequence is Rick extricating himself from the teaser of the last episode, which was such a dumb thing. I still stand by that. The fact that the horse bucks him off, he falls on a piece of rebar, and he's got to like get himself out of there. That's so, with these zombie hordes coming, that was such a big like, oh, is he gonna get out of this one? He gets out of it. He unbuckles his belt, pulls himself up, and gets himself off of the giant metal spike in his abdomen and crawls away. The horse is still there. The horse is just chilling. This is like a max bonded... I'm playing Red Dead Redemption 2 right now, and it's just a max level bonded horse that's just sitting right there during all this danger. And he just jumps... Which, that horse just bucked him off, like, recently. So the horse was spooked, and it's still hanging around, like all these zombies coming. So he jumps on the horse, and he's on the horse for like half the episode. And the horse takes him... and he knows he has to stay conscious, because if he he's losing blood at this point. It's like, once that happened, he's got a hole in his stomach. That's a bad, you will bleed out if you can't get some kind of medical attention right then that involves, stitches eventually, and he's not getting that anytime soon. So he knows he has to stay conscious, but he keeps falling unconscious. So what happens is we're treated to sequences of him sort of in flashbacks of previous events, but also it's not just flashbacks. It's like him like walking through. There's a really good sequence of him walking through like the old hospital. We even get the Don't Open Dead inside. He actually stands over like his hospital bed of his younger self, waking up from the pilot. That's all really, really cool. And there's a really fun like, it's very navel-gazing, but also just a celebration of the series and the fact that it's come so far. Like, hey, remember when this happened 8 years ago? And we're like, yeah, that was cool. And this actually sequence happens later on. He opens this up, and that's the time when we meet Sasha. The first thing is we get that shot of him on the horse going to Atlanta, which happened also in that pilot episode. That pilot episode had a lot of shit in it, didn't it? That was towards the end of the pilot episode. This time he's got the horde moving after him, and he's kind of drifting in and out, and it's a really effective storytelling tool there. But he meets Shane sitting in the car. God, what's that actor's name now? John Bernthal, who's since now I've seen him in The Punisher and all these other things, so he's gone on to do some cool things. But it's really fun to see that actor, and it's a long sequence. It is not just a single. I mean, I guess it is a single scene, but it feels more than the cameos that they've done previously. Whenever they do this kind of storytelling device, which is to bring in like dead characters to talk to somebody who's dying. Which again, I think that Tyrese episode where Tyrese died is the last time that they really did that. But it's a long, lengthy sequence, and it's really fun. It's fun to see these two together. They really haven't had a scene like this. I mean, obviously Shane died like towards the end of season 2, so it's been forever since we've seen him. But they just kind of bro it out, like sitting there in their car. I don't think I have a slide. No, I don't. And it's really fun. Shane basically is like the devil on Rick's shoulder. He's like saying, hey, you need to dig deep and think about the rage, and specifically gives us like, hey, remember the time? And it's literally like things that actually happened in the show, like that time he ripped the throat out of the claimer who was threatening them, and all that's really good. And basically appeals to that fact when Rick was, really angry and like a corner dog, he would lash out and do really violent, terrible things in order to say and protect the people that he loves, which is a nice theme throughout the show. And the comic is like, what lengths do you do to survive the zombie apocalypse and still like maintain your humanity, essentially. And Shane is very much on the chaotic evil, not maybe chaotic evil, neutral evil side of things. I loved it to death. He even boasts about like, hey, Judith's my kid, she's got my eyes. He's like, oh, it doesn't have your nose. It just felt like two guys like chatting it up. And I don't know, I really liked their chemistry together. It was really fun. It made me miss the fact that these two actors had not been together in forever. So it was a really, really nice sequence. That leads to Herschel, because he like goes to like a little house and passes out there. And Herschel, which is a poignant scene because that actor recently passed away, I believe this year. So obviously this was filmed before all that. had happened, and it's not as a nice. I really like the Shane sequence, so this one wasn't quite as good. But Herschel was kind of more the angel on the shoulder if Shane was the devil, and just kind of tells him, you've done good, Rick, and you've led your people, and my people are taken care of. Maggie's a strong woman, and my granddaughter, young Herschel, Glenn's son, will make them stronger, and just everything you've done is good. And just kind of props himself up, and then he goes through that hospital sequence, and then it's a field of bodies that he's walking through, which is pretty sure exactly what Marvel did with one of the Avengers movies. I think it was Ultron, where Scarlet Witch fucks with Tony Stark's head, and he sees that vision of like everybody on the floor like dead. This is very much that, and I think if you freeze frame it, it's a pretty quick pan out, but you can see character. It pans out and then it kind of goes over certain characters, but they're in that sequence. So like every major character of the show is there as a dead body, and they're just all piles of dead bodies that he's walking amongst, which is a really good like visual tool to kind of represent. Like, they're all dead. The only thing that was kind of misstep here is we get Sasha at the end, which is kind of weird. It makes me feel like, was that just the only actor that was available? Because it feels like it was stumbling at the finish line now. Like we had a really good one with Shane, a really good one with Herschel, and then Sasha, who she was a fine character, but she wasn't nearly as big or meaningful, especially to Rick personally, as the other two. How did you not get Lori or Carl? Like, those would have been way more effective to have come back and chat with it. Lori was not exactly a fan favorite, but Carl wouldn't have been amazing, like, drive home. And I get that, they literally got him off the show and he's off doing other things, but man, if ever there was a spot for an effective guest star, Carl would have been amazing here in terms of the important people in his life. Instead, we get Sasha, who's, again, not to bemoan the fact that actress is back for that sequence. That's fine. I think she's great, but I don't know. It just felt weird, like, out of all. And when I saw Sasha, I was like, okay, we're definitely getting somebody else, right? And they're like, no, after that, Sasha was the last one. And it's not really any different there. Just like, yeah, you still did good, Rick. And basically all these characters kind of telling him, if that's a way of him telling himself, like, you did good. Like, you protected people and you led people, and now you need to wake up. At the end of each of these sequences, you need to wake up, and then he wakes up and tries to keep going. So instead of them telling like they need, like, it's time for you to let go, Rick, they're actually propelling him to keep moving on, which I think is a fun way of his own like consciousness telling him to, like, no, you need to keep moving on and keep going, which is what we want our heroes to feel. We want our heroes to be complex and tragic and emotional, but most of all, we need them to never give up. That's what makes a really good, compelling hero. Somebody who, faces danger and does all that and has horrible hardships and all these things, but they just never quite give up. Or if they do, it's a very, important, quick arc they go through where they snap out of it. And here, Rick never gives up. Like, the whole sequence is him just constantly on the move ahead of this zombie army. Okay, he does get one final dream sequence, I forget here. With on the bridge. There's a great shot of panning out where Rick is like shuffling, blood splattering, and the zombies are right behind him shuffling. That was pretty good. And there's a good wide shot of him right in front of the zombie horde on the bridge. Which, hey, that bridge! It's Chekhov's gun is the bridge. And Rick leads them across the bridge, thinking that the bridge will collapse and all the zombies will go in the water. It doesn't quite happen. He first has this dream sequence which I picked up almost instantly. This was a dream sequence because it just felt way too cheaty. I was like, granted, the show could do that, but almost right off the bat, especially when they're all just standing there looking at him, you're like, okay, this is a dream sequence. But even when he first sees him, like, rushing in and saving the day, he sees, like, I don't know, various people, Eugene and Daryl, and obviously Michonne, rushing in to, like, save the day, and then she kisses him and says, oh, you did good, and he's like, I found my family, and all this, it's good. But then she's like, you need to wake up, and then that snaps him out of it. It's a good, effective scene, even though it was obvious that he was dreaming here, but I put a note that there's one sequence where he's running in the campsite and he's still nailing headshots even while like dying from a gut shot wound, and on the ground he's still nailing those headshots. Rick is a bona fide badass. So the bridge does hold, unfortunately for Rick. I believe we can skip to, there we go. One of the zombies knocks over a crate of dynamite, and Rick immediately sees his chance here because this horde is heading basically towards everybody loves Alexandria and Hilltop and all those areas. I think they specifically mentioned the fact that it would head for Hilltop first. It's just a giant horde that has been drawn into our group because of this fighting that was earlier. By the way, as a side note, we never did get a follow-up on that, right? I don't think we did. We a gunfight broke out with Carol's group, and the Saviors. And there was a pretty boy that went after him, and they got guns, and then they came back, and we're like, we need to go kill Oceanside. Like, we never got a resolution for that at all, which is weird, because instead we just see Carol along with everybody else when they show up at this scene. So that was something I'm just now thinking about, that we never got that resolved, because that's how this horde appeared, is there was this giant gunfight between Carol and the Saviors. So presumably we may know about that, but as we learn at the end of the episode, there's a giant time jump, so I don't know if we'll ever actually get a resolution unless somebody just fucking mentions it at some point. But that was a very weird sequence that happened last episode that just never got resolved here, other than the fact that it created this horde situation. At the same time as Rick seeing this, everybody else shows up, and towards the end of that Maggie sequence, like, somebody's like, oh, there's a problem over here, Maggie, and basically all of our main characters, Daryl, Carol, Maggie, and Michonne, so the mainest characters at this point, along with a bunch of other people, show up, and they realize what Rick's doing. They see him on the bridge there at a distance. Daryl's actually firing his crossbow and takes out a few zombies who are about to get to Rick. And the rest of the group freaks out, and they're like, oh, we need to draw this horde away. But Rick's dying from his thing. He's like, there's too many zombies. He knows he has to go out in a blaze of glory, so he does. He fires his gun at the dynamite, shoots it, and explodes the bridge. I don't know what my next slide is. Okay. Obviously, people are very upset about this, and it's a pretty crazy big sequence. The bridge absolutely does explode. Fiery zombies go falling into the bridge. We don't know what happens to Rick. We do not see him at the moment, but presumably everybody sees like he is presumably dead, and all of our main characters were there to witness it. Which at least that's better than what I thought was going to happen. Which I thought he was going to sit there dying on that, construction block, cinder block sequence, and either have no consequence or just a little consequence, maybe with one-on-one with somebody. Instead, it was a nice, lengthy episode where it really drew it out in a good way. Usually the show drags things out in a bad way. And we got to see all of our characters at least be there to see his heroic, self-sacrificing blaze of glory, which was nice. However, there is a twist at the end, and that is one of our dangling plot threads is Anne, formerly Jadis, thought she was going to capture Father Gabe, decided not to kill him or capture him, and instead just leave on her own. She's got a gun ready to take out the helicopter pilot, so she's ready to double-cross him, we think. But then she noticed all these events happening via her walkie-talkie and sees all the bodies and debris floating down a river wherever she's at, and she sees fucking Rick wash up on the shore, still alive, against all odds, very much dying. He's, giant hole in his chest, just fucking bleeding out. So she decides, okay, she radios the helicopter pilot who's coming in and saying, I'm coming in. And she's like, okay, look, I was going to double cross you, but instead I'm going to bring you a B. And we're still not quite sure what A and B means, but she's like, I was going to give you an A, but now I've got you a B. And the helicopter pilot's like, oh, no funny business. And obviously she was about to do some funny business, but instead it goes off without a hitch, because we actually do see in a sequence right after that Rick is in fact in a helicopter, with medical shit all around him, and Anne is right there saying, it's okay, we'll save you. So they don't kill Rick, which is kind of the big twist here in a way. Like, everybody thought they were literally killing off Rick, especially with the last episode, with what happened in the last episode and what happens through this episode. We think, okay, this is going to be his end, and we're dragging out, but I think it would have been okay to kill him here. I mean, as okay as you can kill off your series star on a show that probably should have ended already. But instead, they don't kill him. They just kind of take him out of the show along with Anne, presumably to wherever that is. And that's really interesting. So they actually leave it open for Rick to come back in the future. And I say future because the other thing that happens is something that happens in the comic after the Negan sequence. I was going to say it's a time jump, but they actually did do a time jump here, didn't they? They did about a year. Well, I guess I said a year and a half at this point. I forget how much long it's supposed to be between episodes this season. I think it's supposed to be at least a couple of months. So I think there was at least a year between. I think what happens in the comic is there's about a 2-year, if not more, time jump between literally when Negan and the Saviors surrender to when we start off with the next arc. Which they did a similar thing here, but now we actually got a way bigger time jump. And it was a bit of a shock to see how much of a time jump. First we see Magna's group, which is in the comics, fleeing a group of zombies. And they are saved by Judith Grimes. She's got Daddy's gun and Daddy's hat and Michonne's sword. So she is literally the amalgamation of these two characters, even though she might be actual Shane's daughter. But she is a lot older. She was, I want to say, like 5, probably like 4 actually, right? I mean, she was not quite, probably like kindergarten age, I would think. At the end of the last episode, and here she looks like she's like 10, if I had to guess. So I think we're getting like a 5-year time jump, which is huge. That surprised me. I didn't think we were going to get that here, which means, well, we know they never found Rick's body. So, and it sounded like, I kind of cheated a little bit and watched the next time on or whatever, and it looks like they never stopped looking for Rick. That's kind of an ongoing thing. Is they're still like nobody it's probably a contention where like only Michonne is, he's still out there somewhere, that kind of a thing. But at this point, with 5 years later, that's also kind of crazy. And how does Rick? So that's also crazy. Like, Rick was written out of the show, but still alive. But yeah, we're gonna time jump this far ahead. So obviously he can't get out of his situation. So I don't know. That leaves a lot of questions. Is like, well, how do you get Rick still alive in this universe and him not be back in with the family yet, this far in advance? That's kind of crazy. The time jump is fascinating. We get to see people with a much different situation. They've evolved beyond Rick. Again, we don't see that resolution with the Saviors, but obviously we'll know about it. It's also a weird timing because we're not even at the mid-season finale yet, which I find bizarre that they did all this in episode 5 instead of like 8. Which, I guess, credit to the show for not waiting that long, too. But it seems weird to have like a marquee standout episode at episode 5 without doing it either a pilot or the premiere or the mid-season finale or, one of those big normal, like, sweeps episodes. But instead, that was a pretty big twist that it's Judith here that saves everybody, and we see about a 5-year, I want to say 5-year time jump. I haven't actually looked up any, I try to do these thoughts before I look up any information and see what's going on, but that's pretty nuts. I did not expect that at all. This could be a fascinating reboot for the show, honestly. They could, you go without Rick, so now you're focusing on, Daryl, what's left for Daryl, maybe probably being a surrogate father to Judith, I would think. Michonne, Maggie has now moved on. Maybe Michonne probably hasn't moved on from this tragedy. Carol and Ezekiel are probably running things. Like it's, I kind of like the fact that if you're gonna keep the show going, which I'm not sure is the right call, but if you are, then probably doing a big time jump and just starting things over with new different things could be the way to do it, I guess. I mean, we'll see ultimately, but I don't think I'm entirely opposed to that. Winners and losers for this episode. Let's get a good freeze frame. Probably that one. Winner, Rick, obviously. Went out in a blaze of glory in front of everyone. He was the marquee, star of the show, star of the show, obviously, but star of this episode for sure. And they did a good job, like, doubling down on Rick's past and the characters who have influenced him and all of that. It was a bit of a stumble that I don't think they had Lori or Carl in there, but that's nothing against Rick. How he performed in this episode, I thought he did absolutely amazing. Maggie, I think, was another good winner for her sequence with Negan. I thought that she handled that really well, similar to how Michonne handled him well last episode. She handled Michonne really well, too. And I think it was a good character growth moment for her, and really was a fairly satisfying end to that little bit of dangling thread where Maggie was just super upset about it from the end of last season in terms of her just completely disagreeing with Rick's choice here. So I liked that to see that. And Anne, at the end of this episode, the fact that she saved Rick. She said, like, Rick saved me, and I'm going to pay it forward. It still seems really weird that they saved him and then jumped ahead 5 years. That part seems weird. It's like, well, what happened to Rick during that time? But it does leave an interesting, like, out for that character to still come back in some form, or for AMC to do something else with him. But in any case, it's kind of, and it was a nice surprise for Anne's plot to lead that way. I didn't expect that plot thread to go. I just expected she was going to leave and then that was going to come back as something else, and not that she was immediately going to come into play during this episode during Rick's death sequence, and in fact to save him, which they had teased her involvement with this helicopter and everything else, so it didn't feel too much like a Deus Ex Machina, although obviously it was very convenient that Rick washes up next to her, but hey, it's television, that's okay. Losers, none. Obviously, I surprisingly had no real complaints about this episode or how anybody fared in it. I thought everybody did a great job. I guess my nearest complaint was I thought it was weird that we got Sasha as one of the like important past dead characters that talk to Rick, but I'm not going to complain about getting Sasha. So yeah, I don't have any real losers, which is I think a first for this for my recaps. So I think that's it for my thoughts on episode 5 of season 9. What comes after? If you like my content, consider supporting me via patreon.com/RogueWatson, and I will see you for future Walking Dead recaps this season. Later.